Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to talk through my top 5 favorite exercises for maximizing delt development. But before we begin, it's important to recognize the direction that the various delt fibers run in and what the 3 heads of the delt actually do. So for the anterior or the front delt, the main role is shoulder flexion and a little bit of shoulder internal rotation. For the medial delt or the side delt, the main role is in shoulder abduction or raising your arm beside your body. And then for the rear delt, the main function is both shoulder extension, so raising your arm behind your body, as well as a little bit of external rotation. So because the front delts tend to be significantly more developed and stronger than the medial delt and the posterior delt, it's important for you to incorporate more exercises targeting the weaker and smaller muscles in order to achieve an overall rounded look to your deltoid. With that in mind, and focusing first on the more developed and the stronger muscle groups, so the front delts, the first exercise that I find is key to overall shoulder development is an overhead pressing movement. And you can do this with dumbbells, you can do this with barbells, you can use cables, you can use a Smith machine. There are a whole variety of different modalities you can use. Personally, I prefer the dumbbell overhead press. So of the many variations, I tend to like to perform these seated, at least initially, because they give me a really good opportunity to take advantage of external stabilization of my torso in order to maximize output of the exercise. So I want to be able to lift as heavy as I can safely with proper form and executing the exercise appropriately by using the external stabilization of a bench. And I also like using dumbbells over a barbell or a Smith machine, sometimes cables, but I really want to force each side of my body to act in exactly the same way. And that can help to iron out any imbalances. Even doing them one arm at a time using dumbbells may be a good idea in some people if you find that you have an imbalance in the development of either the left side or the right side. So to set up correctly for an overhead pressing movement, it's important to ensure that you've set a bench to the correct angle. Now, what that angle is going to vary from person to person. Some people, although it's rare, have a degree of shoulder flexion that is perfectly at 90 degrees, so they can raise their arms directly overhead. For most people, however, the ability to flex their shoulder to that degree is limited. And so for most people, including myself, about an 80-degree incline is the best for me. And what you're looking for is, when you set up, is to ensure that your front delt is on top. So if your front delt is facing the ceiling while you're pressing upward, then you know you're engaging mostly your front delt. So use it as a rule of thumb to adjust an adjustable bench to the angle that's correct for you. So once you have a bench adjusted, then you want to get set up. And to set yourself up appropriately for the exercise, you want to make sure that your back is pressed entirely into the pad of the bench. You want to anchor your feet, ensure that you're driving through your feet to support that bracing of your torso against the bench. Retract your shoulder blades and depress them and keep them in that position throughout the movement. Once you have that locked in, you're ready to start pressing. I like to initiate the set at the top of the movement when the dumbbells are directly overhead, and then I just gently, slowly lower them using the contraction in my front delts to lower them to about mouth level. Once they're at mouth level, I come to a complete stop. So it's important to really come to a complete stop before driving upwards, so as to minimize the shear forces on your shoulder joint. You want to preserve your shoulders, you need them for all your upper body exercises, don't ruin them on an overhead press. So once you've come to a complete stop at the bottom of the movement when the dumbbells are at about mouth height, then you want to think about reversing directions and really forcefully contracting your front delt in order to drive the weight upwards. Now while you're doing this, you want to still maintain your shoulder blades back and down. You don't want to be shrugging at your shoulders because then you're starting to use your traps in order to raise the weight. You really want to be focusing on using just the front delt. And so you press upwards, thinking about driving through your elbows to the point just before your arms are vertically above your head, because what you want to do is end at a point where the dumbbells are still a little bit outside of shoulder width apart, and that's going to maintain tension on the front delt. So now that we've trained the stronger of the heads of the deltoid, let's move to the ones that get neglected more often. So the medial delt and then the rear delt. So for medial delts, I like to do 2 separate exercises, and the reason is they challenge different aspects of your strength and development. The first lateral raise variation that I really like to do is using a cable, and specifically the cable crossover station, whether it be the narrow crossover or the wide crossover. And that provides an opportunity to really challenge your delts in a way where the resistance profile of the machine, of the cable, is consistent throughout, as compared with dumbbells, which are heaviest at the top because of the direction of gravity and almost no resistance at the bottom. Now you can perform this standing or seated on a bench. It's up to you. When standing, you have the opportunity to work on your internal core stabilization to ensure that your torso is locked in stone before and during the set. As with any exercise, the way you set up is critical to ensure that you maximize the benefit of the exercise. Now you can perform this at a cable crossover station where the pulleys are adjustable, or if not, in many cases the pulleys are fixed and then you just use the lower pulley position. Select a relatively light weight, so maybe 10, 15, 20, maybe up to 25 pounds depending on how well developed your medial delts are, and then hold the right handle in your left hand, the left handle in your right hand, so it's a crossover type movement. Stand midway between the pulley stacks and then lean your torso slightly forward. Again, the objective here is to ensure that the tension is going to be placed exclusively or as much as possible on your medial delt. And to do that, you need to ensure that your medial delt is essentially on top when you're abducting your arm or raising your arm out to the side. Once you're standing there midway between the stacks and you have that slight torso pivot forward, next you want to check in with your shoulder blades. Where are they? What you want to be doing is retracting them and depressing them. Once that's done, lock everything in stone. This is your starting position. This is the way you're going to set up and remain throughout the entire exercise. So then you begin by focusing on pulling your hands apart. So you're driving your hands apart as if you're dragging your knuckles along the floor. And by doing so, you'll begin to raise your arms again, checking with your shoulder blades, make sure your shoulders are depressed and retracted. Continue to raise your arms until you reach a point where your medial delts are maximally shortened, and in order to raise your arms any higher, you're going to have to start shrugging. Stop before that happens. You want to also ensure that throughout that movement, throughout that upward arc of your elbows, you want to make sure that your elbows are higher than or on the same level as your hands. You don't want to end up in a position where your hands are higher than your elbows because that's going to be engaging your trap. So the second lateral raise exercise that I'm going to discuss is a seated dumbbell lateral raise. And using dumbbells provides us the opportunity to really challenge the weakest point of the strength curve of the medial delt, which is when the dumbbell is right at about shoulder height. A couple pointers for getting set up for the seated dumbbell lateral raise. Number one, if you're using a bench that has a back pad, take advantage of it. Press your lower back into the back pad, lean your torso slightly forward, maybe 10 or 15 degrees. Again, this angle is going to vary from person to person, but the overall goal, and just take a look at yourself when you get set up, is to ensure that your lateral or your medial delt is on top. Once it's on top, freeze your torso in that position. Brace your core. Again, press your lower back into the support of the bench, and then drive your feet into the floor to provide some counter force. Now you want to ensure, again, check in with your shoulder blades. Where are they? Where you want them to be, back and down. The execution now is going to be very similar to what it was for the cable lateral raises. Again, you're thinking about driving your arms out, dragging your knuckles across the floor, and driving upwards with your elbows, trying to keep your elbows above your hands at all times throughout the movement. Again, you're going to stop at a point just before you begin to elevate your shoulders. So keeping your shoulders down, you probably won't get your arms to directly parallel to the floor, and that's fine. That's for you is going to be the point at which your medial delts are maximally shortened, and that's the end. Try to pause there as long as possible because again, that's the main challenge of the exercise. Once you've paused at this most difficult point of the rep, then you're going to begin to lower the weight under control. And what that means is you're still contracting your medial delt as you lower the weight, and then you're going to stop at a point where the dumbbell is still outside of shoulder width. Don't rest there at the bottom. This is not a vacation. Initiate the next rep immediately. Again, dragging your knuckles across the floor as you elevate with your elbows, keeping your elbows above your hands. Moving now to the most neglected head of the deltoid, the rear delt. It's a tiny muscle, doesn't take much to challenge it, but we don't challenge it regardless. It's sitting back there, we never see it, we never do anything about it. And so we really need to focus on challenging that muscle to the extent that we're able. So I'm going to talk about two exercises. The first is the machine rear delt fly. And what the machine allows us to do is, number one, it externally stabilizes us so we can focus all our effort on output or on challenging the muscle with as much load as we possibly can. And as well, it describes our path of motion. So once we set up the machine, we know we're moving our arms, we're challenging our rear delt in the path, in the plane of motion that we need to in order to maximize tension there. To get yourself set up, adjust the seat of the machine to a height where once your arms are extended in front of you and you begin the movement, you're essentially going to be moving your arms in a horizontal plane. Now for some people this might require a slight angle, and for me I need to have a very slight downward arc. So it's not a perfectly horizontal plane, it's slightly downwards as I move my arms back toward my side or back behind me. And that's something you just want to pay attention to because for everyone that angle is going to be, somewhat different, and it may be perfectly horizontal. To take advantage of the external stabilization that the machine is able to provide for you, press your chest into the pad of the machine, and then the key to this exercise, and something that's easy for us to forget about, or because we're so used to holding our shoulders back and down for shoulder movements, it's easy to forget that for this movement we really need to do the opposite. Pronate your shoulders or push them forward. And the cue for this one is to really feel the stretch between your shoulder blades once your shoulders are really pushed forward. And think about maintaining that stretch sensation throughout. Now you want to hold the handles with an overhand or pronated grip. I find this is a much more effective grip than a neutral or hammer grip. Some machines have both, but use the pronated grip. And then with your shoulders pushed forward, then begin the motion by pulling your hands apart. Again, mind-muscle connection. Really think about the rear delt. Really concentrate on what it's doing and try to avoid synergy with other muscles in the back like the mid-trap and rhomboid. You really want to focus your effort on contracting the rear delt. You're going to get to a point where in order to continue to move your arms outward, you're going to start to bring your shoulder blades together. You don't want to be doing that because now you're working your mid-trap. You want to stop the range of motion just before that point. Hold there and then slowly return to the starting position. But again, the key here is to maintain tension on your rear delt. You're not going to bring your hands directly in front of you at the end of the movement. You're going to keep them slightly outside of shoulder width, and that's going to maintain the tension in the rear delt. Alright, for the final movement, again a rear delt fly. Now we're going to use dumbbells. Again, the key to the dumbbell is we're going to be challenging the muscle at a point where it's weakest. So at the top of the movement, where the rear delt is shortest, that's when the dumbbell is going to be the heaviest. Because we're challenging the muscle at a point where it's weakest, or because that's the overall goal of this exercise, we want to provide some external stabilization. So use an adjustable bench, incline it to about 20 to 30 degrees, really just high enough so that when you're laying with your stomach on the bench, your chest pressed into it, and your arms hanging down, the dumbbells don't drag along the floor. You want to be just above the floor at this point, and that's going to position your rear delts essentially on top. Maybe you're targeting a little bit of the rear fibers of the medial delt, but that's okay as well. Once the bench is adjusted to the appropriate incline, maybe 20 degrees, maybe 30 degrees as I said, then you grab your dumbbells using a pronated or an overhand grip again, which I find is a little bit more effective than using a neutral or a hammer grip. Then you want to do the same thing. Push your shoulders forward as much as you can. Feel that stretch sensation between your shoulder blades. Use that stretch sensation in order to maintain your shoulders in the correct position. And then again, start to drive out with your elbows. You're pulling your hands apart. You're using only your rear delt to execute the motion. Again, you're going to end up stopping at a point just before your shoulder blades begin to converge or begin to retract. You don't want that because then you're just using your mid-trap. You really want to continue to focus effort in your rear delt. Continue to raise until you get to that point, and then slowly, under control, lower the weight again to a point where the dumbbells remain outside of shoulder width. Don't remain there. Initiate the next rep immediately, right back up to the top of the movement. Hold there. That's the maximal opportunity for challenge. That's your maximal opportunity for growth. Pause there, then reverse direction and begin to lower the weight again. It's important to recognize that most people generally have more developed front delts as compared with medial and posterior delts. And the reason for this is that we tend to use our front delts a little bit when we do horizontal plane pushing movements. So any sort of chest pressing movement, whether it be a flat or at an incline targeting the upper pec fibers, we do end up recruiting some of the front delt. And for that reason, those muscles or that head of the deltoid tend to be more developed than the side and the rear delt. And so with an additional development, they tend to be pretty strong at the expense of the side and the posterior delt. Overall, as I mentioned at the start, your medial delt and your rear delt, because they're smaller muscles, because they're hardly ever really challenged with very specific isolated exercises, tend to respond very well to higher rep ranges because you're using lighter weight. So when you're thinking about the medial delt, when you're thinking about the rear delt, I try to go, with rep ranges above 10. So 12, 15, even 20. And when I'm really trying to hammer my rear delts, I might even go as high as 25 reps. Or if I get to 15 reps, then I'll add on an additional 5 partial reps. And that really allows me to burn out and challenge the muscle as much as possible. Again, using correct form, because that's important. There's no point doing 25 reps if 5 of them are with appropriate form. No, that's useless. You've wasted your time. Okay, so now that we've covered my favorite, essentially, 5 exercises for overall delt development, there are a couple of tips to keep in mind pretty much for all of them. So if you're doing an overhead pressing movement or a lateral raise movement, shoulder position is key. shoulder blade position specifically. Keep your shoulder blades back, keep them down. Once you have that in mind, once you've ingrained that into your sort of mind-muscle connection, you're well on your way to being able to really maximally challenge and develop your delts. The opposite is true now for a rear delt movement. As I mentioned, now you want to push your shoulders forward and use a stretch sensation between your shoulder blades as the cue to maintaining that position. Keep the weight light, except maybe for your front delts. Your front delts tend to be pretty developed, pretty strong. Then I would use the opportunity to maximally challenge them with load. And if you're going for a really heavy weight, then use external stabilization, use a bench of some sort to support yourself, support your torso. Doesn't mean you don't brace your core, but you have the added benefit of some external stabilization for that. Another key point is to focus on executing the exercise, and really any exercise, not just delt exercises, through the range of motion that you're able to actively control. If you move outside of this range of motion, then you're suddenly going to be engaging synergist muscles to help you to move the weight, and you're providing a greater opportunity or a greater risk for injury. We don't want that, especially not with our shoulders. They're too important. You really use them pretty much for any upper body movement, and injuring your shoulders is going to mean months and months outside of the gym not being able to do any upper body movements, and we don't want that. Tip number 3, or is it 4? Maybe it's 5. I've lost count. Point is, another key point to remember is to slow the reps down. Make sure you're in control at every single point along the rep, and that way you'll know that you're maximally challenging the muscle that you're intending to challenge. Spend the most time that you possibly can at the most difficult part of each movement. Squeeze the contraction as hard as possible in the shortened position, and on the negatives when the muscle is lengthening, attempt to maintain tension there as well. Decelerate the weight using the tension in your muscle. Don't allow gravity to take over to simply lower any of the weight, whether it's cable or a dumbbell. So that's it for my favorite delt exercises, and I've talked through a number of different approaches or combinations of seated, standing, cables, dumbbells, and the truth is you can perform these exercises a variety of different ways. And for each person, the goal is going to be different, the level of development is going to be different, the anatomical setup is going to be different. And so you really need to choose for you what's going to work for your body and for your range of motion and for the various other characteristics that comprise your training program. So if you found the information helpful, if you found the video informative, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe so that you get notifications for other Hawaiian accent delivered fitness information. And if you've heard tour helicopters and or roosters throughout the video, welcome to Kauai. The tour helicopters literally go by all day for about 12 hours a day, and there are probably more chickens on Kauai than there are people. So make sure you come visit Kauai. Get in a good workout, come find me at the Kauai Athletic Club here in Lihue. We'll get a training session in, maybe we'll do some delts, and we'll definitely just tour around and look at some chickens. So that's it for now, guys. See you on the next video. Aloha.